My name's Joe Lemmo, Joseph T. Lemmo, actually, my official title. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in November 19th, 1922. I lived in Brooklyn until I enlisted in the Navy, and that was 1943. And we didn't call them gangs then. The group that I was with, there was maybe, and there's still quite a few of us alive, it was about 10 of us, I would say, that were real close. And we had just come out of church at Mass that time, and we were having a crap game. This is in Brooklyn, and on a street corner, and somebody says, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And most of us said, where's Pearl Harbor? No one at that time, was aware. Well, if they were, there was no significant memory of Pearl Harbor or Hawaii at the time, because traveling wasn't that far advanced as we are today. We were about 17 or 18. There was one fellow in our group, and he had a brother that was in the Army, and he was killed. But that was the only, at that time was the only one that was in the service. But of all our group, everybody went into the service in a relatively short time. I went to Brooklyn Technical High School. When I got out of Brooklyn Tech, I went to work in a small gear shop, and then I applied for an apprenticeship machinist in the Navy Yard, Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I started my apprenticeship there. So they didn't want to let me go, and finally, at that time, I think they called it a deferred inducement or whatever, I forgot which, but I volunteered to be inducted anyhow, and then I went into the Navy. Boot camp up in Sampson, New York. I went to the Great Lakes, and I went to school there for basic engineering. I was there, well, I don't recall the time, but anyhow, the engine that they had aboard our ship, I became a machinist mate. I was a fireman in Great Lakes, and then I became a machinist mate. But they had this, the Norberg plant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, manufactured the steam uniflow engine. And it was an engine that had 10 cylinder heads and a center exhaust port. And they sent us to school there for a couple of weeks, and a week, we also spent a week on a ferry boat from Ludington, from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Ludington, Michigan. That had a smaller version of the engine, the steam engine aboard the ship that we were going to go on. So they gave us drilling and training, I should say, as to what was necessary to maintain that engine. Went to Bremerton, Washington, and then we put the ship into commission in Astoria, Oregon. And from Astoria, Oregon, we went down to Long Beach and got ammunition and got refitted. And then from Long Beach, we went to Hawaii. And at Pearl Harbor, they said this would probably be our home base. But I don't know the time frame, but from then on, we never got back to Hawaii till 1945. So it was our home base, but we never got back there. Guam was the furthest towards home we got. When we left Pearl Harbor, at this time, our ship was only transporting airplanes. I mean, we were a Jeep aircraft carrier, and The primary mission was to transport planes, Navy planes from the land base to the ships at sea. So we went from there from Pearl Harbor to Pago Pago, and most of the crew members, about my age, we never been to a tropical island at all, and going to Pago Pago, and they had these little outdoor markets and stuff, and it was quite an experience for us. We got into Pago Pago, and then after Pago Pago, we started into combat, and that's when the Philippine invasion started. And we started at the bottom of the Philippines, and we went through the whole Philippine campaign on that. Kaiser had built 50 of these ships for merchant mariners, but we got into the war and they converted them over to escort carriers. They were supposedly just designed to ferry the planes to and from to big carriers or landing strips or landing areas. I guess the engine that we could go made maybe 17 or 18 knots, which was pretty good at that time, not today, but, and we had 10 millimeter guns. We had, I think, 16 20 millimeter guns. And we also had one 5-inch mount in the back of the ship. So the engine room would always say that, well, if the captain ever needed more speed, he can always fire that 5-inch gun, and that might just give us the push we need. We only had 2 elevators, a forward elevator and an aft elevator, and that was used to take the planes from the hangar deck up to the flight deck. And naturally, they had a catapult that was something, a catapult. If you ever take off in a catapult, I mean, this was slow in comparison to today's fighters. You're standing still, and before you know it, you're going 80 miles an hour, and boy, you see everything drains back to you, and it's quite an experience to be taken off on a catapult. I took off one time. They were taking the plane to a landing field on shore somewhere, and so they said, well, you want to go? And I said, sure. And that's why I say, I thought my cheekbones were going all over, and I thought my stomach was in my back. At that time, I think 1,200-foot flight deck was the biggest, the largest carrier. I think the Essex and that class of carrier had 1,200 foot. There was a little more than double what we had. These pilots that had to land on these carriers, I mean, they had a 500-foot flight deck, and they had to well, the planes that they were at that time were Wildcats. Well, when the F-4Us came out, they used to land at 80 knots an hour. They couldn't land on our ship because they were too fast. That shows you how slow these planes had to be in order to land and take off. And the landing signal officers aboard our ship, you've got to visualize this. It's 500-foot flight deck, not very, very wide. And he's standing up on a little sponson, like a little deck outside the flight deck, and directing these planes to come in. He has a safety net in case they come too close. He'll jump into that. But there's a man standing up there with just 2 flags trying to get this airplane coming in and to get them set straight on that aircraft carrier. They did a tremendous job, but I think everyone did a tremendous job. Record of planes lost was a minimum. And it's like all wars. You lose more planes through mishaps than actual fighting. I think The ones that were actual shot down may have been 3 or 4 at the most. But um, the planes that would land, because they were shot up so badly, they would, the tail hook would pull out, and any planes parked on the top side they would be wrecked because the plane would hit them, and and in order to make room for the other planes coming in, we would just have to dump them over the side. I remember one of the airmen got a medal for one of the planes coming in, came in, and evidently the bomb, a 500-pound bomb, came loose. Well, maybe it was a 100-pound one. It must have been a 100-pound one, because he came loose and he got there and he tossed it over the side. And one of the other sad incidents in my remembering is that one of our planes came in and it turned over. And when it turned over, the machine guns went off. And at that time, I was below deck sleeping, and a guy in the top bunk, they had 5 bunks. The guy in the top bunk got hit with the machine gun bullets that came through the flight deck. And I'm sleeping, and you wake up to see blood coming down on you. This kind of, then I say, well, what are we, under attack for the moment? But he was taken in up to sick bay, and then it was all right. But it's a horrible sight to see blood coming dripping down on you. One of the last flights we had, I don't remember his name, but he and the pilot took off, and they just, for some reason or other, they couldn't get get speed to get off, and they went into the drink, and the destroyers tried to pick them up, but it was just impossible. The sad part, I guess, when you see somebody being put over the side, and you hear taps, and then the body is just slid into the ocean. It's a very heartbreaking sight. I think there was about 28 or 30 fighter planes and 10 to 12 bombers, what TBM bombers they called them at that time. And they would hold 10,000 pounds of bombs, which, going back then, was an enormous load. After Guadalcanal, they decided to use some of the Jeep carriers for combat, and we were one of the ones that they decided to use for combat. And from then on, we got a regular squadron aboard. These small Jeep carriers, they were called Kaiser's Coffin. We nicknamed them that. The forward hold had 100,000 gallons of airplane fuel, and midships was fire. The boiler room and aft was the bomb storage. And right above the bomb storage, on that deck, we would have where our mess hall was. So at 5 o'clock, when these Japanese come over, they would have to push all the tables down and everything aside to open the hatches so they get the ammunition from the bombs. So we always used to curse them because they were disturbing our dinner. Not because they might get killed, but they were disturbing our dinner. There's some pictures of us, the Steamer Bay, USS Steamer Bay, being shot at from the planes. And I remember one time I was standing again on the sponson, and I seen this Zero coming in, and our gunnery crew shot it down before it hit us. But I went to my battle station after that. I didn't stick around to look around, see it any more happening. So there wasn't too many places that these kamikaze couldn't hit that would make it very vulnerable to them. In the process of taking airplanes aboard, we had a convoy of 6 small aircraft carriers, and each carrier, let me put it this way, the carrier that was taking planes aboard was put in the last position of the V formation of the carriers. And we were in that position, but our planes were late in coming back. So they said, get out of that position and let the Omni Bay take your place so they can take their planes on. And another thing about, this always happens about 5 o'clock in the evening. This is when the Japanese would send over their kamikazes. And their kamikazes, they took 2 kamikazes. The Omni Bay took 2 kamikazes. And one thing I vividly remember is when the kamikazes hit the Omni Bay, you could see all the ammunition that was stored aboard the Omni Bay going off, and it was like, a tremendous 4th of July fireworks. So we considered ourselves a lucky ship. We were Tally 2 of the, Tally-Ho 2, I think, in the code of our code for the battle. Anyhow, we met a good portion of the Japanese Navy. There was 3 carrier groups, escort carriers, not big carriers, escort carriers. And the Japanese had 2 or 3, I've forgotten the number, but they had it was their main battery, main sea force. When the task force commander of the escort carriers was told that we're going to encounter one of the major parts of the Japanese Navy, he said, what shall we do? He says, attack. So we did. We lost, there's quite a few ships, escort carriers were lost in that battle. I think it was Gambia Bay and quite a few, but they were really a battle that was against the escort carriers as being an underdog was just putting it very minor. But the pilots and everybody else that were engaged, they did a terrific job. And finally, the Japanese commander thought there was a much bigger force, and he turned around and he ran away. That's the best way to describe it. At that time, the task force was about 6 carriers, and we would be in that. And I think when we went through there, we were really close to shore, and those shore batteries, we were lucky, and that's about all I can say. I mean, aboard ship, you got 800 people in a small area. I mean, and aboard the ship you have a complete city. We had, I guess like today, we got different names. Pogey bait was candy, and they had a geedunk stand. A geedunk stand was an ice cream stand. So I didn't smoke at that time, but the cigarettes were, I think, 50 cents a carton. And well, in an aboard ship, the what everybody did off duty was gamble. Card games. I mean, there wasn't a time anywhere you can go. I guess certain limits, but most of the time a card game was going on all the time. And one of the interesting things was you would never see, well, you wouldn't see a great amount of dollar bills, but you would see postal money orders. Well, of course, they told us, well, if the ship goes down, they try to save the pay records. So, and the post office was in that. So we would buy postal money off it, or and use them to gamble with. And so you'd see a bunch of little pieces of stubs in the center, and they'd be gambling, playing dice or card playing. And the other things, they had the hangar deck, which was the 500-foot long thing, and that was below the flight deck, and they would set up volleyball courts. And then we had regular Saturday night boxing and that stuff. And the recreation aboard ship was set so that you could occupy your time just about any. And aboard ship, like I said, it was a small city. We had a tailor shop or a lining shop and a laundry shop and a barber shop, and naturally there was a dentist's office and a first aid station and all that. And but the morale was they set it up pretty well. We were pretty well, and naturally they had classes that showed you the different kind of planes, the enemy planes, how you can identify them and that kind of stuff. But tremendous library. But at that time I wasn't interested in the library. I always told my father-in-law, who was in World War I, that, well, when we were at battle stations, and sometimes we were at battle stations for 3, 4, maybe 5, 10 days, something like that. And after we were at battle stations for that long a period, I've forgotten the time frame, but the captain ordered steak and eggs for breakfast, which was a real treat for us. The worst we had was hot soup and sandwiches, because the mess crew, that was the part of their battle stations, was giving us hot soup and sandwiches. And he says, boy, you guys had a life of Riley. He says, in the World War I, we had to shoot rats to eat. And this always stays in my mind, because the difference between the two of us of what was going on. I got to mention him. He was shot in World War I, and he was shot right in the lobe of his ear. And you imagine how close that bullet had to come. And so he survived that, but he had a Purple Heart for that. Our engineering officer said that one of our engines had needed their piston rings replaced. And somewhere in the South Pacific, we tore down the engine and replaced the it was, I'll never forget this. It was 27 inches of piston ring that we had to replace on the engine, and they were the only ones we had. So if you broke them, we would be out of commission. I think the temperature was about 120 degrees in the engine room, but that was one of the good things about being in the engine room. When you ever had an inspection party come down there, we would turn off the exhaust fans so the heat would go up higher, so they wouldn't stay down there too long. As far as the morale went, the whole ship was really, really, maybe that's one of the reasons. Everybody took it as it came, and they didn't anticipate anything. In the Philippines, in Leyte, and we had we had 4 hours leave or something, and we went ashore and got a hold of some sake wine, and we were riding the water buffalo that the natives used for tending their fields, their rice fields. We had just come out of, I don't know, battle stations for maybe 4 or 5 days, and we went to this Isle of Manus, and they said we would have 4 hours ashore. I don't know, maybe it might have been 8 hours, I don't recall, but anyhow, our recreation officer, who was really a real good one, he said that we were only allowed 2 cans of beer while we were ashore. So he managed to get us about a half a case each. So if you ever seen a bunch of drunken sailors coming back to the ship, we were that at that time. At one time, we were had rest and recreation in a camp in Guam, and they told us, don't go outside the perimeter of this base, because those Japanese out there will kill you. And anyone that did go out, I mean, well, we were there a week, and somebody went outside and they killed them. And the Japanese were really fanatic. Ulithi Bay, I think there was such a massive accumulation of ships and boats and whatever the Navy had gotten there. Because I think we were, at this time, we were in preparation for the invasion of Japan. But in this Ulithi Bay, and if you got to envision this is a tremendous bay, and there was thousands of ships. I mean, every kind of ship, from battleship to LSMs and LSTs. And my brother, who didn't come in till about 2 years later, knew I was aboard the USS Steamer Bay. And I knew he was on an LST, but I wasn't aware that his LST was in the same bay. So he seen our ship, the USS Steamer Bay, and he asked his captain if he could come aboard to see me. So his captain asked our captain, and then they said, sure. And now this is a surprise. You know, my brother coming aboard and I'm seeing him. We're about 10 to 12, maybe 15,000 miles from Brooklyn. And we meet out there, and I just thought it was fabulous that we were able to meet at that time anyhow. We went on, whatever, I've forgotten what invasion we went, but he was in on the LSTs, and I was aboard the carrier, and I guess he was lucky too. He survived it. We had bombed, our planes had taken off and bombed Iwo Jima for about a week before. In fact, on the hangar deck, they had the gun emplacements that were on Iwo Jima. And our planes attacked, not only our planes, but all the convoys, our planes attacked it. And then when the Marines went in, they still had a hard time there. Okinawa was the other place. We would go in there for supplies. The day we went in for supplies, nothing happened to us. But the day before, we went in for supplies and fuel and whatever. A kamikaze hit the escort carrier that went in, and the day after, kamikaze hit the escort carrier that went in the next day. So the day we went in, we were just lucky. Just before dusk, and when I see this, it looked like a 2-man submarine to me, and it went just right by our ship. I mean, our ship was, I was on the sponson. The sponson's like a little balcony below the flight deck, and that you would stand there and you can see down into the water. And I think this was the China Sea, and the water was so clear that you could see this submarine just going by. and the captain avoided it naturally. But we had a destroyer escort, and when it got to their ring, they shot at it, and they sunk it. And again, to see something like that go on by you and not hit you, it's tremendous. Sometimes the China Sea was so smooth, it was like a pond. And then there's other times that it was as rough as anything could be. We were on the outskirts of a typhoon, and our flight deck was 80 foot above the water line, and we were taking on water on the flight deck. A destroyer in the center of the typhoon was overturned, and they lost quite a few people on that one. And some of these typhoons can really be, they're tremendous. So, I mean, you try to figure yourself in a ship that has 80 foot between that and the water line, and you can't see the top of the water. So that you're really going down and coming back up. If we didn't do it at that time, the Japanese would have fought to every one of them was killed or whatever. I mean, they were fanatics. Let me bring my own point of view into this. Everybody might condemn Truman for dropping the atom bomb, but believe me, all of us that were out there praised and was happy that he did. I would say a tremendous amount of lives was saved because of that decision to be made. Today, everyone will condemn him for it, but I think at that time he had a very difficult situation to face, and I think Truman made one of the biggest decisions of his life and also saved a lot of American lives. I probably, who knows if I would have been come back. The last trip I made aboard the Steamer Bay, we had been converted to a troop ship. We went to Manila in the Philippines, and we came back. We went to Hawaii first, and in Hawaii, our officer there said that we could, if we wanted to make arrangements to get back east, he would fly into San Diego, San Diego, and make arrangements. So we made arrangements. I made arrangements to get back to New York. This is August 12th now, and just before the end of the war. We didn't know it then, but our captain told us if we wanted to go on leave, we had to get all the ammunition off the ship because it was going into dry dock. So as they say, August the 11th, till 11 o'clock that night, everybody worked to get that ammunition off the ship. And then on the 12th, I got a plane out of San Diego, and we flew into New York, LaGuardia, and then I I went home to Brooklyn, where I was living. It was quite a homecoming. The area that we were living in at that time, they were renting rooms out to sailors and people in the services. So I knocked on the door, and Ruth's grandmother answered, and she says, "We don't rent rooms." And she shut the door on me. She didn't recognize me. But then I knocked again, and she finally recognized me. She did let me in. She says, "Come on in." And she put me in the dining room, and Ruth was out at the time. And when Ruth came home, her grandmother says, "Go in the dining room. There's a surprise for you." And when she walked in, she seen me, so that was a big surprise. We met when we were 12 and 13, and we went to public school 77 in Brooklyn, and I was a senior and she came in as whatever, and so that was the first year we met. And then we were on and off, and then when I went into the Navy, we started corresponding, well, a letter a day at least. So, and all the letters got lost in we lived in Long Island, and the water washed out all our letters. I had set up and told her, well, we'll get married when I get home on leave. So when this day came that I was making all the arrangements to get back, and so she started making arrangements for our wedding. So we got married. She had made all the arrangements. She had had a wedding gown made. Ruth and I got married on the 26th of August, 1945, and right after that, we came out to San Diego, because that's where the ship was. We went by train from New York to San Diego. It took us 5 days. And I mentioned these little incidents. My wife had never been out of Brooklyn, and so we're coming across the plains, and she says, "What's all those little houses outside the big houses?" I said, "They're outhouses." She said, "What are outhouses?" She didn't know what they were at the time. Also, we stopped in Needles, California, and there's this Indian standing there with pigtails and a nice hat on, and she screamed, and everybody said, "That's the first time I've seen a real live Indian." And Needles, California was a hot place. That was 100 degrees. We got back on that air-conditioned train, honeymoon in San Diego, and we went back to San Diego about 3 years ago, and the U.S. Grand Hotel was the first hotel we stayed in. It was still there. It was a nice reminiscing. I was still in the Navy at that time. I didn't get discharged. We lived in a Quonset hut that the Navy supplied us with, and that was terrific. It was a 2-bedroom, and it was a 5-room altogether, and they supplied it for $1 a day, and that's all they charged us, and they supplied linens too. My wife was really happy on that. My wife had come from a big family. When she sat down to dinner, there was always 14 people. So when we got out to California, she made me breakfast one day. And she made a half a box of pancakes, flour. So we had pancakes coming out of our ears for 3 or 4 weeks. Well, when she came back from San Diego, she flew back before I came back from the Philippines. And she left the house at 2 o'clock in San Diego and was back in New York in her house at 2 o'clock the next afternoon. Now, 24 hours today might seem like a long time, but then it was exceptionally short. And it made a trip that I think she made it on a 4-engine transport, which was unusual. And I stayed in until December 13th, 1945. And we went, then that's when I was discharged. A year after we were married, we had a son, Joe, and then 4 years later, we had a son, Robert. And when I got out of the Navy, I went back to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and completed my apprenticeship. And after completing my apprenticeship, I went to work for R. Hohen Company up in Bronx, New York, and they manufactured newspaper printing equipment. And from the manufacturing of that, I went into work as a machinist in the New York World Telegram and Sun. And I worked for them for 15, 20 years. I've forgotten the time. But then I went to work for the Long Island Press, and I worked for them a while. And from there, we went to New Jersey for a while, and then only a year and a half or so, and then we came back to Long Island, and I worked for Redacton Corporation out in Hauppauge, Long Island. And then I did various jobs in 1976 or 77. I applied for, well, at that time was just a machinist, mechanic or whatever. And I went to work for Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and I worked there for 18 years. And So I retired from there with the title of facility engineer. In '91, we retired out here, and I've been here ever since. I think the people in Broomfield are terrific. It's growing too big. When we first came out here, we became part of the senior center, and we met quite a few people and friends there. I volunteered. I was president of the Broomfield AARP chapter, and also at that similar time I was president of the AARP CRESE chapter of the Denver area. And then in 1978 I said, no more volunteering. I retired from that, and now all I do is volunteer for once every other week for bingo for the senior center. Now I just go golfing, bowling, and trying to master the computer. I think I tried too much on it, tried to do too many things on it, and I don't know enough about it. Our son got married, and he had a daughter and a son, Susan and Steve. So we had a grandson and a granddaughter. So my son moved out here in 1978 to Longmont, and so naturally the son and daughter came with them, and so Sue got married at 19, I forgot the year, but she got married, and she has two sons who are 17 and 18 now, so we have two great-grandsons. Being from New York, and I have a son that lives in the heart of Manhattan, he called us at 8 o'clock in the morning and said, we're being attacked. This is when the terrorists struck New York. And he's about 2 or 3 miles from where the actual attack happened. And I think most people in New York, after the second plane hit, was under the impression that there was an invasion of some sort. They really didn't know what was going on. I mean, okay, if a plane hits a building, they'd say it's an accident, but these were no accidents. And I think one of the reasons that I am so sad is that these deaths were uncalled for. There was no war. Trying to compare 9/11 and December 7th, 1941 is a comparison that is good. In 1941, Hitler was running over Europe, and England was on its back fighting. So when the Japanese attacked us, I think most Americans were in the frame of mind of going to war, and they united. I mean, you go back and at that 1941, everybody got involved. I mean, especially the women that weren't in. There were very few women in the armed services, and going back then, the women that were civilians, they were saving their nylon hose. I forgot what they were using it for, and I think the same thing happened at 9/11. The people became very united. I mean, my personal feeling at that time was these terrorists, their only thought is to kill Americans. So why shouldn't we kill them? I mean, before they kill us, I'm still of that thinking that why should there be somebody out there to say kill Americans when America in itself has done just about the most to make mankind a little bit easier, a little bit happier maybe. But we have progressed quite a bit, but yet people want to kill us. Why? I don't know. So I don't know what their aim in life is. The only aim I can see for them is death. And we all going to die someday, but why go so soon? That affected me real bad. I try to think back of what was going through my mind at the time. I don't think, I think we were so busy trying to do what we had to do that the thought of when the airplanes attacked or when we were under attack, it just didn't enter your mind. You know, all these small things that happen that, you know, they do build up on you. And most of they say everybody that was in the war tried, I think that for a while I tried to block out what happened in my mind and just tried to stay on the pleasant things, you know, so that you try to block it out mentally. I think that's why we survived so well. When I lived back east, there was more. I had more contact with a few of them. We'd meet. We wouldn't talk about the war. We wouldn't talk about our experience at all. And again, I think I've gotten out of that, but I think everyone just wanted to put it out of their mind. Now I want to talk about it. And I think that was the feeling at that time, to just keep it out of your mind. I gotten to a point now where I want to talk. I think that's the difference. You know, some people have held it back so long, they just can't bring it out. I communicate with a couple of guys, and I was talking to one son, and he says his father doesn't want to say a thing about it. He was a charter member of the USS Steamer Bay. He put it in commission and all, and he says his father just don't want to talk about it. And so I related some of the stuff that I knew to him, and I think most of them just didn't want to talk about it. But I've gotten to that point where, hey, this is my life. This was my life. This is what I did. When you first called me for an interview, I was wondering, well, what could I talk about? I was so far back that I said, I can't recall that much. And so I started, then after the interview, I said, I got a lot to say. And after you had left, I tried to put down all the thoughts and everything that I had said till I start talking about it. I didn't really know I had them in my memory. Yeah. And then I just thought putting stuff together, and so I dug out a lot of my old pictures, and I started out very small. I thought, well, maybe 12, 14 pages. Then I got up to, well, why don't I include some of the material that I got off the internet on the USS Steamer Bay. So they had about 35 pages. I compressed that down to maybe 20. And then we had a reunion. I went to my first ship reunion last year, 1952. And they had it in Salt Lake City. And it's amazing. As I said, there was about 800 crew members and 2 aircraft squadrons that we had aboard. And of all those people, there was about 35 original members from the USS Steamer Bay, still alive, by the way. When I went there, they had some more material that I was interested in. I picked up about 10 more pages. So now I got a book of about 47 pages, and uh, for last Christmas I made 7 copies, and I gave one to each of my sons, one to each of my grandson and granddaughter, and one to my great-grandson, and one to the other great-grandson. What we went through, and we were able to realize the fruits of all the bad times we had. So we kind of more appreciate the good times than if you never had bad times. We did enjoy some of the good benefits, but by the same token, we realized what we had gone through to gain these benefits. And I think that's the problem today, is that no one has experienced the bad times. We all have experienced the good times, and well, let's hope they continue. I think when I came out of the war, one of the things I said, I'm glad I went through it, but I wouldn't want anybody else to go through it. But that's behind me now.